In this episode, I'm speaking to Corey Archard. Corey's currently the Vice President of Talent at Bumble and has previously held talent leadership roles at companies like WPP and at Wayfair. In this interview, we'll talk about what he learned from interviewing Stephen Bartlett, where he stands on return to office, how he's building high-performance culture influenced by professional sport, and what practical advice he's got for talent acquisition professionals today. Let's dive into it. Corey, thanks for joining me.
So, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
One of the reasons I started this series is to spend more time with influential people, see what I can learn from them. You yourself recently interviewed Stephen Bartlett. I'd love to know what your key takeaways from that interaction were.
Interviewing Stephen's it's kind of like diving into the deep end of a pool. I mean, sort of this real way of storytelling, cutting straight through to the heart of the matter. One of my biggest real takeaways from him was just the power of questioning everything. He gave a really cool analogy on Diary of a CEO where they're obsessed about the 1%, very obsessed. He spoke a lot about they were spent a lot of time researching the right microphone, the right sound system, the right lighting, the chair, the table, and he said one particular thing around the air freshener in the room, and there was a bunch of people in the room. CHROs, chief people officers, some heads of talent in there, and there were a few laugh the air freshener room. Does that really matter? But he gave the example all these different 1% all add up into giving this experience. So that was one of them. I asked him a little bit about resilience as well and how he built his. He's been through many different kind of seasons in his life, and really kind of without missing a beat, he spoke to me about doubt. Not as a weakness, but as a tool, and thinking about leaders should be able to sit with discomfort, be honest about their fears. And it's not really about presenting this polished, perfect version of yourself. It's about saying, yeah, I'm a bit terrified, but I'm going to do it anyway. And he pushed back vulnerability, not really as a trend. There's no virtue signaling there that I saw from him, but it was really as a core value of his. He spoke a lot about vulnerability as a business as well. And again, going back to what he was talking about with his own company, he's got a company called Flight Studio. They have an experimentation department, and I think she's a head of failure there. That's not a really strange thing to have said, but he spoke about failure and that being the route to them being able to learn quickly. This notion that they're kind of always learning, that they're always pushing, and they're always trying to do something different. That was a real strong takeaway, that he's relentless around driving impact. He doesn't just ask what am I doing here? He asks what difference am I actually making? It's the focus on impact that I think genuinely moves the needle for him versus others. So it was a really, really interesting conversation. And you spoke a lot then about, hiring, which I know very relevant to maybe some of the listeners and people listening to this. And just in the order that people spend their time, particularly in the C-suite level. So it was really interesting. He put out that he spends probably, I think he said 70-80% of his time really concentrating on getting the right talent through the door of his business. He was that's the critical thing for me to spend my time doing. It's the most valuable thing that I spend my time doing. And he doesn't see enough C-suite people doing that, enough CEOs really taking the time to be able to do that, show up, talent acquisition teams, talent teams, HR teams, whatever they might be, and really driving that agenda forward. So that was another part that I think there was a lot of people in the room that took that away as another key takeaway, particularly a room full of HROs, CPOs, heads of talent, who I'm sure all long to try and get their CEO, their C-suite, really engaged in conversations like that. So that was, I thought, really kind of fascinating from him on how he spends his time, really.
I wonder if on that first part, there's any learnings for TA. So I've read his book and listened to a good number of his podcasts. So heard him talk about some of those things too, particularly on the 1%ers. And there's also a lot of great content from Rory Sutherland about doing certain things which maybe don't make sense or don't appear to be the obvious things to focus on experience design. So I wonder is there any learning here for maybe doing more experimentation in what's going to move the needle for candidate experience?
Yeah, well, I think he's got a really, he had a really interesting viewpoint around candidate experience. He spoke a lot about speed, speed being a bit of a killer, really. Like if you're not moving at pace and if you're not moving with purpose, then speed tends to kill things for a lot of candidates. And I think if you're sat and you're running a TA team at the minute, like you want to optimize always for speed, but like speed without costing yourself, that experience, and the impact that you deliver, it's not going to be rushed. So there's a real balance there, I suppose, with like rushing hiring decisions, but making really thoughtful, impactful hiring decisions done at speed. So I think there's definitely something there in like, the way that he's kind of experimented in, little things like the air freshener being plugged in. And I read something on his, I think it was on social media the other day. He spoke about oxygen in the room in the scenario around a diary of a CEO. You want people, as he's talking to them in the diary of the CEO, to really like sparked with energy, full of it. And there's a certain level of oxygen. There's a load of research that was put behind this that said that, can't remember what that figure was, but it was a certain percentage of oxygen that needs to be in the room for someone to feel optimal. And when they were testing in the room that they were in, they found it was kind of a suboptimal level, so they increased the percentage there. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that you could test. We've done a few different things like this over the course of my career. We just tested, A/B tested different things within a platform. Like, where's the intersection of technology? Like, how do you build in automation into the funnel? Like, you've got hiring sprints that you do where leaders they all have an interview on site, have a 1-day interview process, get an offer at the end of it. Like, do all these things optimize for speed, but also drive the sort of impacts and output that you're really kind of looking for, which is like the success of that hire. So I think there's plenty of experimentation that you could probably take away from this as well.
The one takeaway I've got from what you're saying there is do more experiments is
do more.
Effectively the message there, right? Cool. I want to talk a little bit about one of the big discussions right now, which is return to office. We've seen Amazon with a big RTO mandate recently. Want to quote you here. This was your take on the office over at Bumble. It's where we solve complex challenges together in ways that can't quite happen virtually. Explain what you mean here and sort of where you stand on return to office.
Okay, so here's my view. So very simply, if anyone thinks that they're able to produce or predict the future of work and get it right, they're probably kidding themselves, fooling themselves. So actually forcing everyone back to the office can lead to a whole bunch of things. People talk about it leading to burnout. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, because everyone pre-pandemic was kind of 5 days in the office anyway. I actually think there's a lot of teams right now that work in fully remote environments that are just as susceptible to burnout as you would have been in the office. You're working longer hours, potentially at home, because you haven't got to commute. So there's like little water cooler moments as well where you get breaks through the day. Like a lot of people I see are in back-to-back meetings. So going 100% remote, is that necessarily the right thing as well? Like, you lose the sense of culture, community, and that's really, really hard to replicate virtually. I spoke to someone that was in a team of mine previously, and she was saying to me a couple of weeks ago about she's just moved, she's on her own, she worked remotely. Her chances for interaction, connection throughout the day are really they're quite small. Like, she spends most of the day back to back in meetings, and her connections all happen at the weekend. So that's not something we used to have. And if you think about things like the loneliness epidemic and how people are kind of more divided than they've ever been before, and largely that's gone in line with the rise of remote working, more digitalization coming into our lives. I think that's been a really interesting thing to see. But I think the point when I made that comment, I was like, I don't think the future of work is about picking sides. So I don't think you pick the remote office side or in-office side. I think it's about designing flexibility actually with intention at the core. And people actually don't really want remote or in-office. They actually want balance and autonomy. At Bumble, we've not mandated anything. We're trying to make the office a place people actually want to go rather than have to go. So we're thinking about creating connection hubs, meaningful in-person experiences. Because at the end of the day, I think if you're just actually following rules, we actually miss the chance to create something that actually works here. So that's kind of my sense of this is flexibility and autonomy, balance and autonomy. They're the things that people really actually want here. And it's how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that in office? I'm pretty sure anyone that works in an office, they want balance and autonomy as well. I don't think, 100% remote is exclusive, that they get better work-life balance. I'm not sure that's the case, but that's the two things that I think I'm optimizing for when I made that kind of quote, that statement. I'm not sure that this is a one-size-fits-all thing. If you've got, there's some really interesting professions out there that, frankly, they have to be at work and be on site, like running a building firm, an architect's firm. There's a lot of like virtual work that you can do, but at the end of the day, you're there. You've got to go and show up and be on site. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach to this, and I don't think this is about picking sides. It's about really getting the intention correct behind why you are doing something.
Yeah, from speaking to a few other leaders in this space, the key thing seems to be the transparency piece and also the match between like who you say you are. So like, what are our values? How do we go about doing our work? And then does that reflect in our mandates? So I think one of the reasons people have been so upset is companies have said we have this high trust flexibility, and then they've changed to a full-time return to office, which doesn't quite match.
Totally. Yeah. I'm not sure how the two can match when you're talking about trust, but then you're mandating that people come back to the office. It's like, well, do you or don't you? Do you trust us? Doesn't feel like you do.
Quick pause to talk about one of our partners, Pinpoint. Pinpoint provide an applicant tracking system that's easy to use, looks great, and is packed with helpful features. However, after working with Pinpoint for over a year now, my favorite thing about them is actually the team itself. They built this flexible software and they're committed to molding that to every single customer they work with to fit their hiring context and specific needs. I'm also a big fan of their free recruitment trends tool where they give away benchmarks from their customer data. I'll link to that below. Back to the interview.
I want to talk a little bit about your background in professional sport, but really how you're applying that to your current role. So we spoke a little bit off camera about how you're trying to like translate that high performance culture that you might see in a sporting environment into like a business and working environment. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I don't think you need to have necessarily have gone and play sport. I think sport is the metaphor here. And that's kind of where, I've always tried to approach it with my teams. Sports, basically like professional sports teams, they measure everything, almost everything. If you think about an athlete, they track their time, their stats, their skills, and everything's about getting that edge. And the mindset there is that every second, every point, every game counts. So actually bringing that mentality to the like corporate teams, it's more about setting like clear goals, really measurable targets, giving people consistent feedback. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe that high performance is just about hitting metrics. Those metrics can exist in sporting environments, but those sporting environments that work really well, they've created an environment where people are pushed to be the best version of themselves. So in sports, that often means like brutal honesty. Like coaches aren't there to make you feel good. They're there to make you better. So I try and bring some of that honesty into the corporate life and making sure that when we're thinking about all of this, we've got the right environment around us, like creating a culture where feedback is direct, but also comes from a place of care. And we got this same, I'll speak about Bumble very quickly for a minute. There's really interesting value of kindness, and kindness shows up in so many different places in the workforce. And I had someone externally talk to me about this the other day, and we're like, well, kindness is that. How do you approach giving feedback? Well, good feedback is kind, and they're kind of insinuating that the bad feedback isn't kind, or constructive feedback in this case isn't kind. Well, actually, that's the heart of it, isn't it? It's like being constructive and helping someone through it. That's a kind way of doing it. Not having that conversation with that individual and knowing something that could help them get better, improve, that's unkind. So I think there's a way of like kindness showing up in all of these individual moments as you think about the transition in like the corporate world. But it's the way it's delivered, that delivered empathetically, that feedback like resonates much more. So that I think is the part of it that I kind of really focus on. Another part I found really, really interesting is resilience and mindset work. I think it's sport have, and they talk a lot about this, that you learn this as a skill over time. In the sports teams and sports environments I've been a part of, like you learn to stay focused even when the odds aren't necessarily in your favor. So there's a level of intensity that's applied in that sporting field that I don't think necessarily transfers fairly over into the corporate world, because sport is by its nature, it is ultra competitive, win or lose. It's as binary as that. Whereas I think high performance culture within the corporate sense is ultimately about fostering that growth mindset. And there's a journey of improvement, and that journey of improvement is as valued as the end destination. So that for me, I think has been a really interesting part of like my thought process as I've like tried to pick up bits that I've seen, bits that I've learned, bits that I've experienced and been exposed to. Those are some of the things that I've been kind of pulling into there.
Super interesting, everything you're saying there. How do you think about sort of acknowledgement on that last piece then? Because this the first thing I thought about is in sport, you obviously get these big moments, right? You get cup finals, or you get competitions, or you get leagues, which you win or lose. You don't often get those big moments in a work setting. So how do you go about like acknowledging if we are improving and moving forward?
I think it's knowing when it is about knowing when you've won. Because I do think you do, no one's going to, you're not going to lift a trophy probably at the end of the year for most of the work that you do, particularly within HR teams that I've been a part of. But I do think you will have your cup final, like what your big things are, like what are the big ticket items you've got to tick off. Like we're getting to the end of the year here, so it's like November, budgets, performance cycles, headcount planning, workforce planning. These are cup final moments for our teams here. So it's about identifying them as such, implying that intensity of focus around them. But then at the end of all of this, when you get through the other side, it's recognizing that you've been on that journey together. You've arrived at a destination. And as all good sports teams do, win or lose, they'll go back through and analyze the result. And did we win? If we did win, did we just scrape it? If we lost, why did we lose? I think those are the real critical questions to ask as you kind of approach those moments throughout your like work season, your corporate season. So, there's no trophy to lift at the end of doing year-end planning or headcount planning. But there is a moment to celebrate together and to learn together and to grow together and work out whether, you can achieve that optimally, or whether there was a suboptimal part of that. Is there something you could have done different?
I like the idea of finding your own cup final, no matter what you're doing. That's a great mental model. Final question then, because we're about there for time. What practical advice do you have for TA professionals?
This is one that I got to very, very early on. I got taught at an agency, and it's stuck with me ever since, which is know the business, not just the role. I don't genuinely think the job of TA is just about filling positions. It's about actually knowing the business inside and out, so that if you're bringing people in, they truly drive it forward. So actually really understanding that, you got to understand the bigger picture. What does this team need to achieve? What are the CEO's top priorities? And I think once you know that, you're no longer just filling seats, you're building a team that genuinely kind of move things further forward. And TA pros who know their business become strategic partners, not just recruiters. And that I think is where the real growth is, like understanding the impact the hires that you're making will have on the organization.
Yeah, 100%. We see this on our like learning platform as well. Like the people who can do this are the ones who can consult the hiring managers, can know when to push back, lead with data, can also have more in-depth and knowledgeable conversations with the candidates, right? So absolutely agree with that one. Awesome. Really enjoyed the chat, Corey. Thanks so much for joining us.
Cheers, Jack. Thanks. Take care.